I want to shout out, I want to give some context and give shout outs here to producer Colin, JB, Jason Jung. They're the ones who did the digging on these takes. I just gave them the prompt, like find the stuff that we got right and wrong, because these three guys, poor guys, I should say, have to listen to every single episode multiple times, both when we do it live and then editing again. So they're probably more familiar with the things that we say and have said than we are. So these are all kind of surprises to us here. But let's start here. As they said, we were actually pretty good on quarterbacks this year, but there was one big miss related to a certain quarterback's health. Let's play the clip here. Puka Nacua, 11th overall. I'm still holding on as the 7th overall pick, but getting more nervous by the day because of the Matthew Stafford injury. The Rams are holding out Matthew Stafford from the joint practice with the Cowboys this week. The Rams view these joint practices as preseason games because they don't do anything in the preseason. The fact that Stafford's not playing is concerning. Like, if we wake up in September and like Jimmy Garoppolo is starting games at some point week 3, week 4, well, guess what? Puka Nacua in the first round, probably not going to age too well. Luckily, we avoided that reality. We did not see Jimmy Garoppolo except one, like I can't remember what game it was. I think it might have been the Seattle game actually late in the season. There was like a sideline shot of him that absolutely no one wanted to see or no one asked for. That was all we got of Jimmy Garoppolo, and that was like in freaking week 16. So that disaster scenario here that we painted never actually came to pass. As I mentioned in the clip, like I still ranked Puka Nacua really highly, but man, Boone, if we had just not had a single headline on Matthew Stafford's back, I mean, we would have all lived in a happier world in August, that's for sure.
I mean, he would have been a little bit higher in my rankings. I know I wasn't in that clip, but I also had him pretty low in my rankings outside the top 20. And it wasn't just the injury concerns. If we remember correctly, right? Like there was the whole immortal chamber thing and all that stuff. Yes, that was happening. But we're also talking about a guy who's talented, but is an older pocket passer. And when you're talking about fantasy quarterbacks and you're trying to shoot for that upside and those ceiling outcomes, it's a lot harder for an older pocket passer to get there, to get into the top 10, to get into the top 5, which Stafford ended up doing this year. What they need to do to make up for the lack of rushing is they need to have a massive yardage total and or a massive touchdown total. He ends up with both. So he came through. I also think the one area of this one where I really feel like I missed, and I had Javonte Adams as a top 20 receiver in my preseason rankings, but the spot that I really think I missed was the potential for him to just go off as a touchdown scorer, which he's really done in every stop of his NFL career. But you started to think the age with him and, you know, how much of an upgrade is it going to be over Cooper Kupp last year? Turns out a massive upgrade, right? It brought this offense back to life and back to basically where they were a couple years ago. So yeah, there were a bunch of things along the way, but still I would say, like, from a process perspective, like if you look at the top 12 fantasy quarterbacks this year, the vast majority of them do offer something with their legs, right? 8 of the 12 had over 300 rushing yards. 2 more, Brock Purdy, who you already mentioned earlier, and Daniel Jones, they got hurt this season. They both would have gone over 300 rushing yards had they been healthy for the full year. And then the other 2 guys were Dak Prescott, who had a pretty good year of his own right, over 4,500 yards and 30 passing touchdowns. And then Stafford, who had this great year, right? So it is still a lot harder for these pocket passers, and especially these older pocket passers, to have these meaningful fantasy seasons. But Stafford in the Sean McVay offense, with the weapons around him, with Davante Adams still having plenty of juice left in the tank, he got it done.
46 touchdown passes for Matthew Stafford. Second place was Jared Goff with 34. 12 more touchdowns in the second place man here this year. It was huge. I think I'm not quite sure what the lesson to learn here is, because I think if you take everything that was said on this show from the moment Davante Adams signed until about, I don't know, July 21st, it was all like glowing about the Rams. And I think at some point like that, I think we could have talked ourselves into this, maybe not the, 46 touchdowns, right? But a QB1 season from Matthew Stafford, because you mentioned historically, this is how it happens for these pocket passing quarterbacks. It's, do you play, I always come back to the Peyton Manning Broncos years. Do you play in an offense where it's just historically efficient because it's loaded with weapons? That is what this Rams offense was. Like when Davante Adams signed with the Rams, I was very convinced it was an upgrade over Cooper Kupp, like a significant one, specifically in the way that he was going to be used as that ISO X receiver, which did have a high touchdown ceiling. And the other thing I was convinced about was that him being in that role would allow Puka Nacua to play more around the formation and get these designed targets and be historically potentially the number one overall receiver this year. But those points became less and less talking points because of the Stafford back situation. So like, again, truly, I am trying to think of like, what do I learn here other than there is going to be a few headlines in August that are just complete noise and we're better off ignoring. This was one of them, but it was the dominant story of August in NFL training camps. And I'm not sure that it would have been responsible to just sit here and say, oh no, it doesn't matter or anything like that.
Yeah, I also think when you're talking about Puka, like if you had told us before the season that Davante Adams was going to score 14 touchdowns, we might have had a few concerns about Puka and how that was going to all work out. And yet, of course, Puka ends up having a great year. And I think that just goes back to Stafford having this kind of season at his age. These are more outliers. Like you think about like some of the best quarterbacks ever. And as they get older, you know, you mentioned Peyton Manning, Tom Brady with the Bucs. Like it was a similar situation where he had really good receivers, really high end receivers that he could rely on. They threw the ball a ton. He had over 40 touchdowns in back-to-back years with the Bucs, right? Like that also is an outlier. It doesn't mean every quarterback that's very talented as they get older are going to come through, because Aaron Rodgers isn't doing that, right? He's not in the same kind of setup. He doesn't have the same kind of weapons. He isn't even like really the same kind of quarterback the way he plays the game right now, right? He's more willing to take the dink and dunk stuff and throw the ball away and, you know, doesn't want to really get hit. He's just not set up right now to have one of these kind of seasons. But I'd love to see him in a Sean McVay offense and whether he could do something like this if you tried to make him do it. Regardless, I still think these are outliers. So we have to look at them with a fine-tooth comb and really try to pick our spots when you're going to bet on one of these guys coming through. And overall, I'm rarely going to do it. Maybe a little more in Dynasty because you can get a discount on older quarterbacks and older players in general. So you can get some of these guys a little cheaper. Tom Brady's a great example. I think I brought up on the show before. I'm in one analyst league where I think one of the other managers thought that Brady was going to retire before the Tampa years. I got him very cheap. And all of a sudden now he's on my team for back-to-back seasons throwing for 40 touchdowns. That doesn't always happen, but of course you can get these discounts on older guys in Dynasty. So that's one area where maybe you want to look at trying to get these guys cheap and bringing them on your roster as a super flex, as a second quarterback kind of thing. And you hope that you hit there. But in regular redraft leagues, I'm still going to be betting on the younger guys, on the guys who are going to have the rushing ability. I just think that's the better approach to take. And I think this year, when you look at the top 12, like I said, there were way more of those guys hitting than there were these older quarterbacks who are these pocket passers who need these massive touchdown totals and massive yardage totals to come through.
Well, speaking of that, let's talk about two young quarterbacks that you and I were optimistic about that did not come through from a fantasy football perspective this year. And now these were from our bold predictions show. And as I always say with bold predictions, I always jokingly say, listen, if we get close, we're allowed to victory lap. If we get it wrong, it's a bold prediction. Don't count. Doesn't matter. But on a serious note, if we're going to make a bold prediction, you got to at least get in the ballpark of the bold prediction. Okay. Like, for example, me saying, Drake London's going to be the wide receiver one overall this year. I think we can safely say, like, if he wasn't going to be hurt, if he didn't get hurt, he was going to compete for that title. He had several wide receiver one overall weeks. So it's like, okay, close. We're in the ballpark. It's not humiliating that he wasn't wide receiver one overall. What is humiliating is somebody like myself saying that Bryce Young is going to finish as a QB1 as a bold prediction. And that did not even come close to being true. Bryce Young finishes a QB 19 this year, which ironically is ahead of Lamar Jackson, who of course did not push for a full season this year. But yeah, Bryce Young, I thought there was a chance that this offense could be really fun, could be really efficient. He could carry over what he had at the back half of his second season. We did not see that this year. He had some random big games for sure, but for the most part, the Bryce Young experience, it is what it is, and I'm not quite sure if there's going to be another step there.
Yeah, I had him ranked pretty low as well, QB 21, but I did write him up as a potential breakout candidate in my breakout column. But it's funny, like if you look at what he did this year, and I agree with you, like we saw last season, late in the year, he looked a lot more comfortable. He started rushing more, and you figure, okay, Dave Canales, he's got his hooks in him now. They're figuring it out. and he likes the offense, and away we go. And now they go out and get Tyrell McMillan in the first round, and great, this thing is going to go to another level. We just really didn't see it. But it is kind of funny that if you look from week 11 on, he averaged the 12th most fantasy points among quarterbacks. That's kind of what he did last year. Last year, it was like after the week 11 bye, he was a top 10 fantasy quarterback in fantasy points per game. And yet, and I think you would agree with this, it didn't really have the same vibe this year. It didn't look the same. He did have a couple big games, but it really didn't inspire the kind of confidence that I think we were coming out of last season with, going, okay, maybe there's a chance that we do see this career get salvaged and he ends up being the long-term answer there. I think we're coming out of this season and we'll see what happens, right? The season isn't over yet. We got the playoffs to go here, but I don't think that we're walking away from this fantasy season looking at him as the kind of player who is going to be a strong fantasy option moving forward, which is unfortunate because they're kind of putting something together there. This team is competitive now, and yet Bryce Young really hasn't answered the call in real life or in fantasy consistently.
No, definitely not. And I think that's actually one thing to learn from this is that a big part of, my optimism for Bryce Young maybe taking a step forward this year. And I don't think Bryce has been terrible by any means. I think he just has a pretty firm ceiling as a player. And I think that obviously is going to matter from a fantasy standpoint, especially with how they want to play. That they obviously want to play in a style that makes the quarterback a passenger, not the driver here of the bus. And I think given how Young has played so far, that's totally fair. I think the thing to learn here, though, is that a big part of the reason that we were that I was, maybe optimistic he could be that QB1 was the way he performed in the back half and carrying that over. But that's just not how it works. Bryce Young has been a 12th most fantasy points, whatever you just said there in the back half of this year. That does not mean I'm going to be optimistic about how it's going to feel in year 4 for this offense. So that's a mistake that I think we do make often is we count what happens at the end of the year probably more than we should when we carry it over into the following season. Like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The full sample is still very predictive overall.
Yeah, and last year, like I mentioned, one of the things that boosted his fantasy stock late in the year was he was running the ball a little more. He comes out this year, week 1, 40 rushing yards, and you think, great, we're right. He's going to continue running the ball. This is fantastic for fantasy. And then after that, 10 rushing yards or less in every game in the first half of the season. After that, week 1, 40-yard rushing game. He just didn't produce the same kind of way this year. And again, though he did start to run the ball a little more down the stretch, I just don't think we can have a lot of confidence in him being a great fantasy option moving forward.
Again, I mentioned there was another young quarterback that one of us was optimistic about. Famously in the Bold Predictions show, Justin Boone, you predicted that J.J. McCarthy will have a Patrick Mahomes second-year jump. And again, obviously, you got yourself pretty worked up on that one. You if people remember from the show, I remember this because I was there. It was in person. I could see yourself building. You stacked the take on top of a take, and you lit your own fire on that one. But nevertheless, you were optimistic about McCarthy in Kevin O'Connell's offense this year. 11 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, and a bajillion injuries and some historically bad EPA per play performances. Obviously, it did not happen for McCarthy this year.
Yeah, I should have been cool about it. I should have just said he could finish as a QB1 like you did with Bryce Young. I didn't. Yeah. I went further, and I threw all the caveats out there. The Mahomes comparison,
of course,
was not based on the stats. It wasn't that he was going to throw for 50 touchdowns and 5,000 yards. It was more about a first-round quarterback who was in a great environment, who didn't play much during his first season, and for McCarthy, didn't play at all, and yet had this good environment, had these good weapons, had a great play caller and coach, and we had seen Kevin O'Connell really come through with some pretty veteran journeyman quarterbacks and make them fantasy relevant, like Nick Mullins types. So why wouldn't he be able to do it with this first round guy? And it didn't happen. We didn't see it. He didn't look comfortable out there at all this season. He still showed he does have some rushing ability, but man, the touch on his passes, the accuracy on his passes, you see it in the frustration of the teammates too, right? Just they don't believe in him. You can tell. And maybe something will change in the offseason. Maybe he'll get much, much better and he'll win them all back over. I kind of doubt it, but we were all joking the other day that what's the stat that you point to for McCarthy? That in his 10 games, he did end up having a winning record. He was 6-4. That's about all you can point to. And that is not something to hang your hat on for fantasy. So Yeah, it doesn't look like it's going to happen for him. I think I've already said on the show, like I'd be very surprised if they go into next season if he's the week 1 starter, unless something dramatically changes in the off season. And this still, like, this team wasn't that far out of the playoffs. So if they had gotten even average quarterback play, if they even had Carson Wentz out there for the whole year and he didn't break down on them, maybe they'd be in the postseason. It's kind of sad because there's a lot of talent on that team. There's a lot of great fantasy assets that you would have liked to have seen better seasons from, like Justin Jefferson, like Jordan Addison, and even some of the running backs, right? Aaron Jones, Jordan Mason, they had their moments, but overall this offense just didn't get to where we thought it could go. And a large part of that is because McCarthy didn't answer the bell and doesn't seem to be the player that they thought they were getting when they drafted him in the first round.
Yeah, experience and reps is just so critical and so important, and this is a guy who just doesn't have a lot of experience and doesn't have a lot of reps, and at some point I think we'll see if he can recover that, but for now, like, that just is the driving story of JJ McCarthy's NFL career. Let's get to the running back position here, and let's get to another clip here. This is about the Dallas Cowboys backfield, which we as a collective show got atrociously wrong. Let's hear what we had to say.
He is super cheap, and there's not that much risk involved. I understand it, but his ECR right now of RB33, like, that's just entirely built on people going, someone has to carry the ball in Dallas. I guess it's going to be that guy, right? Like, he has not proven that he can be this player anymore.
I think there's a real opening for a guy like Jaydon Blue, because neither of these two guys, Javonte or Miles Sanders, are passing game weapons. And this is going to be an offense that throws the hell out of the football. I would not be shocked if the Dallas Cowboys lead the NFL in pass attempts this year. Jaydon Blue is a guy who is a mismatch weapon, can be used as a receiver out of the backfield. And just like bottom line, this is a great offense with a good offensive line. The interior is definitely a strength. We want to take shots on this running back. And Jaydon Blue, running back 54, 128th overall. Yes, when you get to the late rounds, that is the type of profile you should be targeting. Like, just stop. This is, by the way, if you're listening to this, this is now January, Matt talking again. It's just like, there's nothing worse than hearing yourself talk generally. The only thing worse than that is hearing yourself say something so stupid and so wrong. Even in the first clip, Boone, as you're talking about Javonte Williams and his expert consensus ranking, like, if I just stayed quiet, I maybe could have dodged the bullet there, but then I have to come in with gross for his running back 33 consensus ranking. Javonte Williams finished as running back 11. And the dumbest thing about what I said is that, well, these guys aren't passing game weapons. Jaydon Blue, Jaydon Blue, like, talk about a guy I want to just like completely forget exists. The Cowboys forgot he existed, by the way, for the first 17 weeks of the season, and I think justifiably so. My favorite sleeper running back, Jaydon Blue. Oh my God, the only thing I said there that might have been, like, actually helpful was that they could lead the NFL in pass attempts. Dak Prescott second in the NFL in pass attempts with 600. Bo Nix, by the way, 612. I actually did not realize Bo Nix led the NFL in pass attempts. That's kind of crazy. Anyways, Javonte Williams, him being a receiving threat in this offense and a receiving option in this offense was a big reason why he ended up being a guy that was on the field all the time. Please, let's take Jaydon Blue's stats off the screen. No one needs to see that. But Javonte Williams being a passing game threat was a big reason why he ended up finishing as a top 12 running back.
Yeah, for sure. Just completely got this one wrong. And we knew from week 1, right? He came out in week 1. Yeah, he looked great. Yeah. He had a great fantasy day, found the end zone a couple times, I'm pretty sure. And it was just like, oh no, we're totally missing on this one. And he was that cheap back that you could have got and thrown into your lineup as potentially RB1, more likely your RB2 based on where you were getting him, even potentially your flex, and a guy that could help you win some games in fantasy. I do think that the best part of this Cowboys backfield is like the running joke that we had all season behind the scenes with producer Colin, where we joked that it was just over for Jaydon Blue right from the jump. He had injuries. He was a healthy scratch. We kind of kept that going all year long, teasing producer Colin, who notorious, everyone listening, I'm sure knows, is a wild Cowboys fan. But yeah, for Javonte Williams, I don't think it was just us, Harmon. I think it was like everybody in the industry. I'm not sure I can pinpoint the person. And still, I don't know about you, I ended up with him on some teams, but it was like reluctantly. It was like, oh my God, I got to take this guy in like the 9th or 10th round. Like, I guess he's still there. Sure, I'll take him. And then he ends up being like a valuable asset for your team. And you feel like a fool, even though you're a fool who's winning fantasy games. So yeah, this is one where I think we tried to sell ourselves on the rookies, on Blue, on Phil Maffa. And as you mentioned, those guys didn't do anything really throughout the season until week 18. They both find the end zone, but there was a reason why this team didn't need them, didn't even need to try them really throughout the year. I know Blue got an opportunity at one point, but didn't really do much with it. And that's because Javonte Williams still does have a lot left in the tank and was fantastic this season. And in an offense that we were pretty excited about, why didn't we take more shots on the veteran back who's been like, okay, like, I know all the points I made before the season that this is a guy that never really produced as like a meaningful fantasy player. He always shared his backfield. So you figured there was going to be somebody else involved. He totally broke the mold on that this season. He was the guy. He was able to carry the load, and he came through for fantasy. So yeah, hats off to him. And this is one that we were completely wrong about.
Honestly, I'm actually really mad at myself about this one, and the reason is, well, the reason is twofold. One, because I just didn't even like entertain the idea that Javonte Williams could be, like you mentioned getting him. I didn't get him on any teams. When we did a live draft, I did a live draft at the Fantasy Football Expo. JJ Zacharyson took Javonte Williams super late. And JJ's my friend. I was giving him crap, of course, but I literally like laughed at him and said, "Have some self-respect." So again, I'm JJ's a friend of mine. I'm joking around with him, but nevertheless, I sound like a complete, if that soundbite exists, which thank God it doesn't, that would be humiliating. So it just, and Boone, in my younger years, back when I like started doing fantasy content, I was always willing to be open-minded to like the LeGarrette Blount on the Patriots season, the guy that everybody thinks stinks, but oh, guess what? He's in a good environment. He's going to score fantasy points. I don't know what happened to me along the way here, as now I'm in my mid 30s. Maybe I've just become bitter and I don't know, like my imagination is dead, but I'm pretty upset at myself about this one. So I'm going to continue to beat myself up about this and try to be more open-minded about these situations in the offseason. Let's talk about a team that actually was a really good offense with a talented running back at the helm. And this running back did not come through for fantasy. And this one we don't have a clip for. And Boone has already talked about this situation many times, so we can be quick about it. But Boone, you said in the fourth round, your favorite pick was Kenneth Walker. I actually wrote an article like with a similar statement here saying I wanted to take both Seahawks running backs, just not on the same team. That was my thing about it. But I was optimistic, maybe not as optimistic as you, as more of a centrist on these two guys, but was still optimistic about Kenneth Walker as like a fifth round pick here. So we can wear this one together. It did not work out for Kenneth Walker in the Seahawks backfield.
Yeah, and I don't know how many times we have to litigate this one. This is certainly one that I feel like I took the L on early in the year. And like you said, like JJ McCarthy was a bold prediction, so I don't beat myself up too much about that. This one I beat myself up for, not just because it was bad fantasy advice, but it was also bad fantasy advice that I was employing. I had him in a ton of drafts. I had both him and Charbonnet in a ton of teams, and it didn't work out. And even the weeks where it did work out, it was very hard to project which guy was going to be the one that would go off, and the matchups were really tough. So you'd want to shy away from them because they hadn't done much. And then all of a sudden in a tough matchup with, let's say, the Rams defense, they go off and have great games. So it was like the most frustrating possible scenario where it wasn't just that they were bad or they were injured or you could throw them on the bench and never think about it, because every once in a while there would be a big game and they would all of a sudden come through and you'd go, man, what did I miss about that contest? And in some of like the Rams games where Walker had good performances, I'm not exactly sure what I missed, but both games against the Rams, he performed very well in those. I mean, I don't know what else there is to say. It's a huge L for me. And it's also funny because you look back at like the first 3 weeks of the season and Kenneth Walker had 2 top 10 performances. Like he actually did have good games early in the year to the point where you would have been like, great, like it's happening. And clearly we know now it did not happen for him consistently enough. Almost never. It was very, very rare when he did have good performances for fantasy. So yeah, it was a very bad call. And we're going to now see, because Walker's a free agent. So we're going to see, will these guys finally end up on separate teams? Will we see them both get backfields to themselves? And I think if that happens, they might both be players that I'm in on next year. I don't know. We got a long way to go before we get to that point, but I still believe in them as talents, and I think just this overall rushing attack didn't produce as much success as we thought it was going to, based on what we saw from them in the summer and what we were hearing about them in that Clint Kubiak system.
Yeah, that was the funny part, was hiring Clint Kubiak was all supposed to be about fixing the run game for the Seattle Seahawks, and instead it really fixed the pass game, and that was the place to draft Seahawks assets in fantasy football, particularly one, Jackson Smith-Njigba. All right, final one we're going to do in this segment before we toss to break. This is a clip we have on Saquon Barkley, who was one of the bigger disappointments in the first round this year.
Are you really worried about this workload thing? Like, we've talked about it a bit back and forth. I'm not as concerned about the workload, and maybe that's me being foolish. Maybe that's me just trying to push it aside. And maybe I'm the one that's looking at last year's stats too much and just going, why can't this guy do something similar? And even if it isn't that, what if it's 80% of that? That's still worthy of going in this range of drafts. He'd still be a great first round pick, even if he gives you 80% of his stats from last season.
Here's the interesting thing about this. So obviously Saquon Barkley did not give you really 80% of what he did last year. He was running back 14 on the season. So not ideal. 1,100 yards, 9 total touchdowns. The touchdowns were a problem for sure. The explosive plays were also a problem. Boone, I'm not sure that it has anything to do with the workload. This is the thing. I think the mistake here for Barkley is assuming that situations are static year to year, because that was, to me, the big difference here in the 2024 versus 2025 Eagles.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly the point that I was going to make. This was the one that I kind of feel like I should push back on, because I don't think that take was necessarily wrong, that it was a volume issue. I think it was the overall struggles of this offense. I think it was the offensive line underperforming and having injuries. I think it was the new play caller and the offense really never just finding the same kind of rhythm that they had last year. And maybe the fact that he had so much volume last year, maybe that contributed to him maybe not quite being the same 100%, one for one player that he was a season before. But still, I think it was the issues all around this offense where you saw a bunch of players on this team underperforming throughout the season. It wasn't like it was just Barkley not being the guy there. So yeah, that was the only one where I felt the need to maybe push back a little bit. I'm glad you said that. And even later in the year, when apparently Nick Sirianni took on a little more of a role in the offense, we did see Barkley get back to being a fantasy RB1 from week 14 on. He had over 90 scrimmage yards and a touchdown in 3 of his last 4 games. So I think the problem was kind of outside of just Barkley. I don't think it was a workload concern, but regardless, he did not have the season that people thought they were going to get from him when they drafted him in the first round.